Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's call, Uniting Americans in Service, the Power of AmeriCorps and Philanthropy Working in Partnership. I will now hand it over to Kathleen Enright, President and CEO of the Council on Foundations.
Caroline, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone on the council team who pulled this together. And welcome, everyone. Again, I'm Kathleen Enright, the President and CEO of the Council on Foundations. I just want to thank you for taking this time on this Monday morning to be with us. The Council is just really excited to host this webinar with our partner, Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement. They're also known as PACE. Their CEO, Kristen Campbell, and I are just pleased to together support AmeriCorps and Michael Smith in this conversation today. AmeriCorps, you know, is the federal agency that advances national service and volunteering, and its mission is actually uniting America through service. And I bet we can all pretty much agree that that is a vital mission, particularly right now. National service is so vital because, you know, it builds bridges. It does so in many powerful and important ways. And as we mentioned, there's a bridge that we want to build with philanthropy. And we saw in the poll that some of us know a good deal about national service. And we see the results here that some are very familiar with AmeriCorps, which, you know, used to be called the Corporation for National and Community Service, and some are not so familiar. So we're glad you're here too. Some of you are funding already national service programs, and others, I bet you're here because you probably want to get started. We have just a few that aren't yet involved in funding. So we appreciate getting this data. It's going to feed into PACE's research, and we will feed it back out to you after the session. So we know that all of these kinds of partnerships rely on deep and trusting relationships in order to go well. And that's why we are so lucky to have Michael Smith now serving as the CEO of AmeriCorps. Michael is a friend to many of us. He is a natural born bridge builder. He knows a heck of a lot about federal service, about national service, and about philanthropy. Before his appointment this time at AmeriCorps, he directed the Social Innovation Fund. And before that, he was also with the Obama Foundation. He was the executive director of My Brother's Keeper Alliance. And he's also been a board member at PACE. So Michael is committed to philanthropy and committed to national service. And we're just thrilled that we can be in relationship with him. So Michael is going to be in conversation with our very own Tonya Allen. Tonya is the president of the McKnight Foundation. McKnight is both a member of PACE and of the council, and the council is lucky enough to have Tonya Allen as our board chair. So Tonya and Michael have invited a few other grantmaker colleagues who will join them to share their experience with national service. But with no further ado, Tonya, I will hand it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And it's so good to see you, Michael. It's just really a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the Council on Foundations as well as PACE again for hosting this conversation. And I want to thank Michael Smith for having this first conversation with us. I think if I understand, this is your first national kind of coming out party. And what a place to do it with all of these friends and loved ones around across philanthropy. So Michael and I have known each other for a very long time, and we've gotten into what good trouble together quite often. And so I'm really pleased to have this conversation with Michael. And so Michael, one of the first things we talked about this, a conversation I shared with you that a fun fact about me, that is in 1993, I was, or maybe it was the beginning of 1994, I was a member of the first AmeriCorps program in the state of Michigan. It was called the Michigan Neighborhood AmeriCorps program at the University of Michigan. And for those who are trying to do the math on how old I am, don't worry about that. That's not your concern. But it's really a pleasure to kind of come full circle and to be able to be with you, because we all know that service is such an important part of philanthropy. And our efforts are really to fuel service, fuel people who are doing good work in our communities, and to create more opportunities for people to be involved and to be engaged and to be contributors. So Michael, I have luckily, as a philanthropic leader, been able to participate in both foundations. The last two foundations I've worked at, we funded AmeriCorps. So at Skillman Foundation, when I worked there, we spent a lot of time making investments and helping young people who were doing safety work across the country. And then McKnight in 2003 really helped establish a Reading Corps program here throughout the state that's still going and thriving. And my understanding is one of the most successful reading programs in the country. So I'm really grateful to be a part of a philanthropic legacy that really values service. So I know that service is important to you with your work with My Brother's Keeper, also with the Case Foundation, and so many other things. So I'm wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about why service is important to you, and how it connects strategically to philanthropy.
Sure. Well, Tonya, thank you so much. Thank you to you, to Kathleen, to the entire Council on Foundations team, to Kristen and the entire team at PACE. Tonya, thank you for your service as an AmeriCorps member. I have to thank AmeriCorps members wherever I go. Kristen Campbell, who runs PACE, is also an AmeriCorps alum. And so one of the wonderful things about taking on this job is we see the legacy of AmeriCorps everywhere. We see them in foundations. We see them as members of Congress and White House jobs in corporate America. We're not going to ask you how old you are, Tonya, but next year, AmeriCorps turns 30. It was an initiative that was launched by President Clinton that came from so many years with President Bush before him and many presidents before that, and just trying to figure out how do we harness the power of national service to address the nation's most important challenges? How do we provide just enough infrastructure around it, incentives around it, so that we could have AmeriCorps members that are lasting change in communities all across the country, and not setting an agenda for Washington, but really figuring out what are the needs that are on the ground in a community. And so 30 years later, we now have 250,000 AmeriCorps members and senior volunteers serving in 40,000 locations in every state and territory. We now have more than 1.2 million alumni that are also working in so many ways, continuing that spirit of service in lots of different ways. One of the things, for those of you who don't know about national service, I think it's important to know, oftentimes people think of AmeriCorps members right out of college or right out of high school, but you can be a AmeriCorps member from 18 to 80. We actually have more than 100,000 AmeriCorps senior volunteers and senior members. So there are ways that we can involve people at every time in life. And so, you know, AmeriCorps is a federal agency. We're a government corporation, and our job is, how do we harness service and civic engagement? How do we address the nation's most pressing challenges? How do we get things done for America? And what I've been happy, I think during the pandemic, we saw how national service could really stand up and step up. You saw AmeriCorps members that were working in testing and vaccination. You saw many AmeriCorps members, with 55,000 AmeriCorps members that are in K-12 schools. So when teachers were trying to figure out how do we adjust, AmeriCorps members were right there as well. We have AmeriCorps members that are helping to build workforce pathways. We have AmeriCorps members that are literally helping to build houses across the country. So chances are, if there is good that is happening in a community, AmeriCorps members are right there. And what's been so wonderful is philanthropy has been our partner every single step of the way. We move about $1 billion a year through our AmeriCorps programs with our state commission partners and our partners across the country. But philanthropy helps with match. Philanthropy helps us to drive and test innovation. Philanthropy helps us to create new programs. Philanthropy helps to figure out wraparound supports for our members. So there are lots of ways that philanthropy and AmeriCorps are strategic and constant partners, leveraging the best of the role of the federal government with the best of philanthropy. And you'll hear some great examples of some of our colleagues in philanthropy that have been doing just that.
Yeah, that sounds so amazing, Michael, because I think like at this time, we're in a world where it feels like things are shifting so rapidly, right? Um, and some of them have felt and have been pretty significant crises, like the pandemic, the racial reckoning, of course, climate change. And so with the scale of change that's coming towards us, I always think about this as like, what is this our opportunity to do? Is this our opportunity to fix, or is this our opportunity to build? And neither is wrong, right? Like sometimes you actually have to do both. You have to build and fix at the same time. And one of the things I love about AmeriCorps is that it's really just designed for people to really roll up their sleeves and to work, be it a builder or a fixer. And so one of the things that we've seen, particularly with the racial reckoning, is that our country is trying to figure out how to do both. How do we fix some of the fix and repair some of the harm that we've seen, but how do we build a new future? And so as a part of your agenda and as a part of President Biden's agenda is to center equity and justice in that work. So I'm wondering if you might share a little bit about how you see AmeriCorps embracing these ambitions, and what do we need to know about this from a philanthropic perspective so that we can also be champions for this effort?
Thank you for that question, Tonya. There are a couple things that I would note here. One is the beauty of AmeriCorps. It is both meeting urgent, immediate, pressing challenges in communities today, and we can move on a dime. We have AmeriCorps NCCC teams that respond to disasters, to fires, to flood. We just celebrated the 10th year anniversary of FEMA Corps, where FEMA can deploy our teams to where they're needed most. We have teams that can, be right there when the hospital is needed, or be right there when schools are having problems. And so we can meet those needs where communities are having challenges. But we are also helping to build up a generation of leaders that can build and change and fix and repair and restore the challenges that not only are communities facing today, but building a brighter and better future. And so we are doing both. So for instance, just a few weeks ago, we launched Public Health AmeriCorps. Public Health AmeriCorps is a $400 million partnership with the Centers for Disease Control. And what we're doing with that is we are meeting some of the urgent challenges that are coming out of the pandemic, but we are also intentionally trying to tap into public health workers and build the next generation of public health workers from underserved communities, because there are so many openings and gaps. FEMA Corps, which I just mentioned, again, meeting urgent needs today, but also moving these young people that are taking these jobs into FEMA jobs. So I was just a few weeks ago in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where we graduated our most recent FEMA Corps class. FEMA issued offer letters to 70% of those AmeriCorps members. We are doing work in inner city communities, so like Power Corps, PHL in Philadelphia, teaching young people how to do tree removal, how to do climate mitigation. 20% of the apprentices in the Philadelphia water department now come through that AmeriCorps program. And so it's so important to see that we can do both. So it's not just a one-off service experience. You feel good about yourself and then you go on about your life. It's changing communities and changing the members as well. There are three other things that are really important to me. One is our renewed focus on impact. I think if people were watching AmeriCorps over the years, you might say, is that 1,000 flowers blooming? Is that a lot of nice work? But over the past 10 years, we are focused on impact and evidence. And just last year, 70% of our grantees had strong or moderate levels of impact. And so we actually know the work that we're doing is making a real measurable, tangible difference. And for philanthropy should know this, we have an incredible research and evaluation team that helps our grantees build evidence. So you can consider AmeriCorps a pipeline for things that you might want to invest in, or we can do that side by side. The other thing that's really important to me is making sure that national service reflects the diversity of our country and the communities that we serve. We have a little bit of an optics problem with AmeriCorps. Chances are you might think AmeriCorps, doesn't necessarily look like America. Actually, we are higher than all of the numbers, whether it's African American, Latinx, tribal, Asian American, we are higher. We have some work to do, though, when you have an AmeriCorps team coming into your community to make sure that it balances the numbers in your community. And one of my big priorities, Tonya, is making sure that we address the barriers to service. Our living allowance is not kept up with the cost of living. Our education award, which folks can get, has not kept up with the cost of college. Other barriers to service that exist for grantees as well haven't kept pace. So we need to make sure that we know those barriers and confront those barriers. And the other thing that's important to me is making sure that national service plays a role in bringing people together. If you've been around it, Tonya, and I'm sure you probably even saw this in your AmeriCorps class, there is something special about people from multiple backgrounds coming together. Maybe it's a young woman who grew up on a farm in South Dakota with a young man who grew up in inner city DC, and they are tackling the problems of literacy, or they are tackling the problems that are facing HIV/AIDS patient, or they are tackling the problems of disaster. They're rolling up their sleeves, and all of those things that divide us begin to fall to the wayside and people come together. So we are going to do more to show how national service can bring people together, bridge differences, and really address the polarization that we've seen.
Oh, I love that. I mean, well, you know this better than anyone. We have to figure out how to bridge the differences and create a larger tent for us to talk about issues and try and solve problems. But before we get into that question, because I really want to dig a little deeper in that, I thought maybe we might invite our friend Ridgeway White, who's the president of the McKnight Foundation, into this, because Ridgeway has been a partner to AmeriCorps, and AmeriCorps has been a partner to the city of Flint, particularly when they were going through crisis. So I think it might be really helpful to hear from Ridgeway talk a little bit about how AmeriCorps helped during that water crisis. That's still ongoing in some ways.
Thanks, Tonya. You know, we're all coming out of crisis and trying to sort through it, but you know, AmeriCorps has been great and so helpful. And for those in philanthropy listening today, you know, we've really figured out how to partner with AmeriCorps and turbo boost the outcomes. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Flint National Service Accelerator and how it's just a perfect example of how philanthropy and government and others can come together to get things done. So it started in 2011 with a small pilot program created by community partners with a big vision. Our local United Way, Boys and Girls Clubs, Community Foundation, Mott, were all inspired by the possibility of harnessing national service to tackle local issues. The Accelerator connects national AmeriCorps service members with local agencies and nonprofits in Flint. It lowers costs and helps organizations recruit, train, and place members to work on a variety of issues. Since its inception, the Accelerator has made a difference. It has mobilized core members in times of crisis and helped move the needle on long-term priorities. The Accelerator was crucial in responding to the Flint water crisis. AmeriCorps NCCC teams were among the first groups to arrive. They sprang into action, distributing thousands of cases of water, filters, and test kits, and coordinating volunteers. Fast forward to 2019, and that year alone, NCCC members served more than 10,000 hours in Flint. They distributed food, worked with students, removed over 113,000 pounds of debris, and boarded up hundreds of abandoned homes. And it made a difference. For instance, the areas where members worked on blight saw a 10% reduction in crime. Then, during the pandemic, Corps members became first responders yet again. They served at vaccination clinics and helped their host sites provide services to the community. Last year, the Accelerator supported over 250 AmeriCorps members at 11 sites. They worked on early childhood education, the opioid crisis, community safety, and more. And the benefits of such work extended beyond discrete projects. That's in part because the model is hyper-local. Over 75% of AmeriCorps members serving in Flint are from Flint and Genesee County. And many contribute to community even after their service ends. AmeriCorps alums now lead important organizations in Flint, such as the Latinx Community and Technology Center and the Genesee County Land Bank Authority. And then there's the return on investment. For every dollar of federal and matching funds invested in AmeriCorps and Senior Corps programs in Flint, the return is $27.40. For all of these reasons, Mott has supported the Accelerator from the start. We've also supported Service Year Alliance to help spread the model. 4 communities received $25,000 in challenge grants and secured matching funds, more than doubling those dollars and bringing 6 other funders to the work. We're excited to see this grow and hope to see more. And we're always happy to share the model. So come see us in Flint.
Thanks so much, Ridgeway. Interesting enough, when I started in AmeriCorps in 1993, our first training site, because it was university graduate students, which I was with, and we were combined with community members, our first training was actually in Flint. It was the first time I'd ever gone to Flint was because of AmeriCorps. And you know, I go often now because I like to go visit Ridgeway. So thank you for sharing that, Ridgeway. Awesome. All right, well, then let's talk a little bit about this, because I remember back then, like in about 1993, or in the early 90s, what we saw was like philanthropy and government deciding that we were going to make a big play on volunteerism. And I often marvel at what we've seen as a result of that play, because we now have imprinted on many generations of young people that service and being engaged in the community is extraordinarily important. And I actually think that it has really lifted up young people's voices to move from thinking just about service to thinking about systems change, and to think about what does it mean to flex their power through activism. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, Michael, how are you managing this tension where we see with young people who are saying, I don't want to just do service, I want to lead change? And then I'm also wondering, as you think about this legacy that was set, you know, almost 30 years ago. And I would just say, like, if AmeriCorps is turning 30, I'm going to turn 32 next year. But if we saw that this was set like 30 years ago, what do you want to imprint in our national psyche around what service looks like and what we can be in the next 30 years for young people?
Sure, Tonya. It's interesting that you talk about this tension. I actually see it as a pathway from charity to justice, right? Service helps to build that muscle. Service helps to inspire. Service helps a young person that goes to a food bank with their mother or their father or their mentor begin to understand the needs and the challenges in their communities and builds that muscle. So maybe they're starting to serve in that food bank, then one day they come and they're a policy advocate for hunger and homelessness. You know, we also have AmeriCorps programs that are right in the middle of that pathway from charity to justice. So for instance, we have Impact Justice that is out of Northern California. And what they are doing is they are making formerly incarcerated individuals that are younger incarcerated individuals that were incarcerated when they were younger, they are making them AmeriCorps members to serve as credible messengers to help reduce incarceration for younger youth. And so you're seeing some really interesting programs like that are coming together. But I think all of us that do this work, right? We know that you have to think about systems. We know that you have to go all the way upstream to make sure that we're not, you know, serving sandwiches and handing out soup and giving out coats for the rest of eternity, but that we can figure out how we get to the root of the problems and start to solve some of those problems. But people have real needs today. And so service is meeting those real needs and challenges that community members are facing right now, while also beginning to build the muscle for folks that start as a Teach for America member, and then one day they're going to be a superintendent, you know, that start at Washington AIDS Partnership here in DC as an AmeriCorps member, but one day will become a health advocate. And so it's a very important relationship that is important to the health and the productivity of our communities and our country, and building this muscle and these leaders who are going to change the world.
Oh, thank you for that. And I think you're exactly right. One of the things I love about AmeriCorps is like this engagement of diverse, to your point, you have a very diverse core, and bringing them into solving problems, into the conversations that will actually lead to policy change. And I know that our friend Tyra Mariani from the Schultz Family Foundation has been investing in this type of work. So I'm going to invite Tyra on to talk a little bit about her work in Washington.
Hi, Tonya. Hi, Michael. Great to see you both. It's wonderful to be amongst friends. And as you noted, Tonya, of course, we're here because we believe in the power of national service. But aside from meeting communities' needs, which you've just spoken to, we also believe in the power to really change the trajectory of young people's lives. And that's where we focus our giving. We know that young people gain valuable experience. Michael has been speaking to that for much of this conversation. But we also know that AmeriCorps isn't accessible to all young people who want to serve. Young adults of color, young adults from low-income households are much less likely to serve in AmeriCorps or to see it as an option because it's not financially viable. And so we, in our giving, in our partnership with AmeriCorps, focused on creating equitable access and opportunity. And we focus it mainly in three ways. The first is that we are embedding into the AmeriCorps service experience professional development and training that helps to prepare young people with the career readiness skills and industry-specific skills that they need. We're also supporting state service commissions as laboratories of innovation through our National Service Challenge and encouraging funders to join this work through matching funds. And then finally, we're bringing our grantees together through a community of practice to share and develop effective practices around equity-based recruitment, retention, post-service strategies. The last point may be the most important aspect of our equity work. We initially looked at increasing the stipend for members and removing the financial barriers for nonprofit organizations to participate in AmeriCorps. And we quickly learned that while financial barriers are a significant challenge for young adults, we had to look at the full ecosystem to begin to understand other access barriers that exist and prevent young adults of color and low-income young adults from serving. This deepened our work in the space and how we help to increase the access and the value of AmeriCorps for all young adults, not just the ones who have the financial means to serve. And so we've learned that, creating equitable opportunities takes time. It's not just, increase the stipend or encourage folks to go recruit more diverse members, but it really is working as a community of interested parties, from funders to states to the agency itself, on what more we can do. And so as we think about this, we know that philanthropy has a critical role to play where states and agencies may be less able to go and fund risky ideas. Philanthropy can. And so that's where we have stepped up. And we know that the agencies themselves can support the development of new ideas and partnerships. We know states have the ability to bridge the work of different state agencies. Michael spoke to that in the beginning of creating service to public career pathways or connecting workforce development agencies with national service. But foundations, again, have that critical role in fueling innovation. And so by combining the philanthropic funds with AmeriCorps dollars, the amount of funding and human capital flowing into local communities in need is really amplified. It's just a win-win all around.
Great, thank you for that, Tyra. And I think you just hit the point that I was talking about around builders. Like, you're investing in how AmeriCorps creates builders of the future. And the work that Ridgway talked about was really about like how young people can be fixers. Like, we need both of them at this particular time. And I just really appreciate your lens on equity, on the stipend, on the investment in college stipends and further education awards. I don't think it changed since 1993. It may have. It did, Michael.
It has changed. It's still not enough.
All right.
Next year, AmeriCorps members will get a Siegel Education Award of closer to $7,000. So we've got work to do, but it has grown. The stipend, on the other hand, needs a lot more work.
Okay, good. All right. So, Michael, you raised this issue around democracy. And I want to just kind of come back around, which I promised to do, was that the council has made it a priority to build a common ground. Like, we really believe that it's so important for us to reunite divided communities, that there is power and strength and standing in the middle, creating a space in an environment where people can come who might have different ways of thinking about issues and even different ways of solving issues, but they have to have a common ground where they can come and at least talk about it. I often like to use a 70-20-10 formula, which I use, which is like, basically, if people are struggling with an issue, that most cases, we agree on 70% of the issue, and 20%, if we can figure out what that 70% is, and then 20% we could probably negotiate, and 10% is just the third rail. We will never come to agreement on that, but for the most part, we always start with the 10%. And so as a result, we never grow, like we're never finding that common ground. So can you just talk about how you see the state of our democracy and civil society today? And how do you see the role of AmeriCorps helping to bridge those divides as we think about this issue? I know this is important to the council. It's also important to PACE in its work. So I'm curious to hear your thinking.
Yeah, Tonya, it is hard to imagine that we could potentially be more divided than we have before, given the history of this country. But the data and the research shows us, and all of us who are living in this country every day, see we are further and further separated. The internet allows us to live in echo chambers. Bob Putnam's research that he's done showed us, especially for low-income communities, the things that brought us together. This is for everyone, but especially in low-income communities, the things that used to bring us together, people are doing less and less of. So church attendance. I think about my church, where my mom was a single mom and she served on the usher board with the woman who was the corporate attorney, building social capital and coming together. The Elks clubs and the Rotary clubs, things like this that used to bring us together, neighbors from all different backgrounds, we're doing less of, and we're finding ourselves in more and more echo chambers. So how do we rebuild places and spaces where we can see each other's humanity, where we do not enter in with a Republican frame or a Democratic frame or a big city frame or a rural frame, but we enter in with a common humanity, a common spirit of trying to see each other and try to tackle something together. And there's been some research that's coming up in the folks that do bridge building work that says, there is something special about service that is different from politics, that is different from other ways that people come together in rooms. It's not a kumbaya, let's sit around and have a conversation. It's not a political campaign, but there is something about service when we are rolling up our sleeves and doing the work of community together that allows us to see each other, allows us to build relationships that not only impacts us, that potentially impacts our families as well. So we've seen that in AmeriCorps programs across the country. So now what we're focused on is a little bit more research to understand what are those unique elements. We're looking at potential ways to train AmeriCorps members in the elements of bridge building. So no matter what you're doing, you can make sure that you're taking those skills into your work. We're also exploring with partners across the country, are there ways to test innovative projects across the country where we're combining service and bridging to understand what it takes to make a real difference. But I think of the federal agencies that are out there, AmeriCorps has a real role to play in bringing us together, unlike anyone else.
Can I want to weave in one of the questions that came from the audience related to this. And I think one of the things that Michael Seaman is interested in is really this notion of how is AmeriCorps really further engaging, or maybe that's not the right question. How is AmeriCorps developing a system that really gets more and stronger community engagement? So as we're talking about this notion of service and how we serve together, AmeriCorps, obviously it's a set of select people who are joining this effort, but are there other ways that you're thinking about community engagement as a way to help build democracy or even maybe reach more people?
Yeah, my hope is, and I think AmeriCorps is already there, but my hope is on my watch, AmeriCorps will become even more proximate. I think what's important to note is we are not a force based in Washington, D.C. that is deploying to do something to a community. We are the community. We are in 40,000 locations across this country. As we heard earlier from Ridgeway, we are homegrown talent. We are people coming from Flint, coming from Seattle, coming from Washington, D.C., that want to give back to their communities. And in the times where we're adding talent to community, their job is to listen to community, to learn from community, to support community and find out what community needs, where community sees as a challenge and opportunities, and then add some extra muscle to address and impact those problems. And the other thing that I think is important to know about AmeriCorps is we're force multipliers. So we have the opportunity through one AmeriCorps member to bring in more volunteers, to do more training, to bring in more corporate and private sector partners, in addition to the work that one AmeriCorps member is doing. So we are close, we are connected, we are of community, but I hope that at the end of my watch, and I don't only hope, I know at the end of my watch, we will be a more diverse Corps, we will be a more proximate Corps, and we will really be rooted in the needs, challenges that are driven by community members themselves.
Great, thank you. So I want to move us to Q&A in a second, but before I do that, I feel like I would just be remiss if I didn't mention, like, you and I have been in the trenches together working on My Brother's Keeper, which was an effort. Well, we were working on it before there was a My Brother's Keeper, really trying to figure out, like, how do we help our country turn into a place where boys and men of color can thrive, like that we're focusing on them getting what they need so that they can be, they can thrive and fulfill their dreams, and that they have a shot at really kind of living the American dream in some ways. And the challenges with our system is that they are focusing more on what it takes to survive, right? And so that shift is really important. So I'm curious from your view, if you might want to talk a little bit about how you see the work of My Brother's Keeper show up in this space. Like, what did you learn from that initiative? What did you learn from working with government and philanthropy that is critical and important for us to consider, or that you're going to bring into the AmeriCorps context? What does it mean to have these kind of like public-private partnerships? How do we make them stronger and better? What did you learn from My Brother's Keeper in that viewpoint?
Sure. Well, I bring My Brother's Keeper with me. The ethos, the vision, the mission, the spirit of it everywhere I go. I am, because so many people kept me. My parents were 16 years old when I was born. I grew up in a poor Black community that didn't have a whole lot of money, but had a whole lot of love and a whole lot of people that were committed to making sure my dreams would be possible. And so the work that we do is about getting the back of those communities, helping to build capacity. And when I think about the work of My Brother's Keeper, it shows up in AmeriCorps so often. One, when we were launching My Brother's Keeper Alliance, the nonprofit that still exists as a part of the Obama Foundation, the President Obama went off script. And he was talking about a roundtable discussion that he had with a group of young men right before. And he said, I want to talk to Malachi, who was one of the young men that had inspired him, and to all of the young men that are here today. And he said, I want you to know that there is nothing that is more important to the future of this country than whether or not you and young men like you can achieve their dreams. And so that spirit follows me everywhere I go. The work of My Brother's Keeper about creating clear pathways to opportunity for all of our children. This idea of making sure that we believe that our neighbors' children are our children, because if they can't succeed, this country can't succeed. That is the root of what we're doing. Making sure that there is a fair chance and an equal opportunity, and we're building capacity so that everybody can succeed. So that is something that I take with me. I also take what is at the root of that. You know, there are a lot of people that would have probably been very happy if My Brother's Keeper would have ended at a speech, or would have ended with a mentoring day or a take your kids to work day. But President Obama pushed us to say, if this is important to the future of America, then this needs to be evidence-based. The Council on Economic Opportunities did a study that showed that if you were a Black baby boy born 25 years ago at that time, you had a 1 in 2 chance of being employed in America today. Tragic. It also showed if we could close the employment gap between young men of color and their peers, we would see a 2% increase in the GDP. And so this idea that we have to know what we're talking about, that it can't just be heart, but it has to be head, because we all benefit, is something that I take with me everywhere I go. And so AmeriCorps will be focused on impact. It will be focused on evidence-based approaches. The other thing that I take with me, Tonya, is a focus on systems, right? We were constantly pushing back, right? There were a lot of folks who, where it was just going to be enough to be a rites of passage program. It was just going to be enough to do a volunteer day. But we knew if we were going to make a difference, to change the legacy of 400 years of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and all the things that our communities are facing, we had to really look at systemic solutions. We had to really look at policy reform, which is why the work that Tyra and I did in the Department of Education in the White House, we started with 100 recommendations to change policy. Second Chance Pell, the pilot program, which now has become such a big deal across the country, it started there. So really looking at systems. And then the other thing that I think is important, and I'd love your thought about this, was creating a big tent. This could not just be government alone. The first conversations we had, we talked to Sean Dove, who was at the Campaign for Black Male Achievement and is now at New Profit. We talked to Jeff Canada at Harold Children's Zone. We talked to you, we talked to Darren, we talked to Dr. Bob Ross, and we said, what have you learned? What do you know in all of these years of funding? And how can we combine what government has and what philanthropy has to make a real difference? And some of that work that we did together still has roots and is still continuing to flourish, thanks to us locking arms and not running alone in one direction. But Tonya, I'm sure you had a lot of lessons from that time together. Would love to hear from you as well.
Well, I would love to, but I'm, as a moderator, doing very poorly around time. but I think the big point out of all of this, which I agree with you, is like we have to scaffold on what we've built, right? Like, and this move with AmeriCorps, and I think your leadership here is creating an opportunity for us to continuously invest, create more opportunities for young people to get involved and engage, and particularly making sure that we have equitable pathways, particularly for young men, Black young men, brown young men, all young men of color who have been systematically excluded from these opportunities. And so I want to bring in Brandy McHale, who leads the City Foundation, because I want to hear a little bit about how she is making sure diverse voices are at the leadership table and are being granted access as a result of AmeriCorps.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really appreciate the conversation so far and super excited. I'm a huge AmeriCorps fan, and I will tell you, when we were thinking about our participation in My Brother's Keeper and launched an initiative at City and the City Foundation around connecting young people to employment. This was during a time where the employment statistics were very different than they are today. We were far from full employment, and young people had unemployment numbers in, greater than 20% in certain communities. And, it wasn't just that jobs didn't exist, but I think that we also have to remember that the feeling that I don't belong also exists. And so we worked to create a program called Service Works that organized young people in local communities to work together to identify a challenge or a problem in their local community, engage others to volunteer, and to, through volunteer service, address something in their community. The whole idea was, yes, it was important, the intervention, what it was they were trying to address, but this was really a way to get young people to build their confidence, to see themselves as problem solvers, not problem contributors, to see themselves potentially as having a place and a voice, that they would have the confidence to move from the neighborhood corner to the corporate C-suite. And as we organized this effort, we placed AmeriCorps members in dozens of community-based organizations across the country to run these service activities with young people. And I will confess that initially we thought, AmeriCorps is really a way to make this work from a financial standpoint. This model, it was a really cost-effective tool. That was the wrong way to think about it. One of our biggest learnings from all of this was the power of the AmeriCorps member and the role that they played as role models to these young people. It was incredible. We could have brought in whatever curriculum we brought in, whatever outside speakers we brought in. There was nobody that had more influence than that AmeriCorps member on the young people that they were working with. And the second piece is that one of the unintended outcomes of this program is we were amazed at how many of those AmeriCorps members actually went on to take leadership roles in the community-based organizations that they were placed in. And so what they've become are next generation of social innovators in this country. So I think about AmeriCorps as a way to invest in solutions today, but it's also a down payment on our civil society that we need to build for tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Brandy. You're absolutely right. And I appreciate you going to what Michael has been emphasizing, impact. Like, let's stop thinking about the program and let's think about what the impact that we can accomplish. So Michael, we've gotten a couple questions about the ecosystem in which AmeriCorps works in. So I wanted to raise that. So there have been a couple questions about, like, what's the engagement of AmeriCorps potentially with Peace Corps, City Year, Teach for America? So how do you see AmeriCorps engaging, supporting, building stronger partnerships? And then the second question around the ecosystem is really about what do you see in terms of the field of service, right? And the agency, AmeriCorps, what do you need for the agency, or what do you see missing in the field that a philanthropy could be useful in helping meet that need?
Sure. So let me do a quick 101 for people to understand how AmeriCorps operates. So one, AmeriCorps is a separate federal agency, and Peace Corps is a separate federal agency. We are both a part of the national service family, but obviously Peace Corps provides an opportunity for you to go serve abroad, and AmeriCorps provides opportunities for folks to serve in their communities domestically. AmeriCorps was a coming together of multiple agencies that existed prior to 1993. So there are now 4 major programs. We have AmeriCorps State and National, which provides funding to some of those organizations who you might have not known were AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps grantees. Teach for America, City Year, Public Allies, National and College Advising Corps. Those are all AmeriCorps grantees that get funding from the federal government through AmeriCorps, and also their young people are AmeriCorps members who get education awards from AmeriCorps as well. We also have AmeriCorps NCCC, which stands for the National Civilian Community Corps, which provides teams that go all across the country, young people usually, some older ones that serve as team leaders that are in teams of 10 to 12 that travel around the country responding to disaster and urgent needs across the country, and also doing some preparedness and mitigation. We also have our AmeriCorps Seniors programs, which, again, I said we've got folks from 18 to 80. We have foster grandparents, senior companions, and our retired senior volunteers program. So if you are someone that is an older American over 55, or you're looking for something for your parent or your grandparent to do, there's great work that's being done by our seniors across the country. And lastly, we have AmeriCorps VISTA, which is one of the oldest programs. VISTA goes back to the 1960s, and VISTA specifically works with community organizations and city governments that are working in deep poverty and helping to respond to the issues of poverty across the country. So that is the AmeriCorps 101 and how we exist. So there are lots of different ways, if you go to AmeriCorps.gov, that you can figure out. And in terms of what do we need, I would say philanthropy. You heard some great examples from Tyra and Ridgway and Brandy. Thank you so much for your partnership and for doing that. But I would focus on 3 things. One, help us reduce barriers to service for members. We are working hard with our partners in the Congress and in the White House to continue to raise the living allowance for AmeriCorps members, which frankly just hasn't kept up. Thanks to a historic $1 billion investment that came to the agency from the American Rescue Plan, we are making year-over-year increases. But the base AmeriCorps stipend for an AmeriCorps member is just under $8 an hour, and so we know if that's not being matched by philanthropy or other partners, that's just not enough when you're competing. Can go walk in Five Guys and make $15 an hour right now. And for our seniors, there's an even smaller stipend for our seniors is a little under $3.50 an hour. So one, help us to reduce those barriers, match the funding so we can raise living allowance. Think about transportation, think about food benefits, think about housing benefits, think about other incentives that can really help AmeriCorps members of all backgrounds serve, so that this isn't a luxury for a few. We're going to do our part to make that happen, but while we're working to move the QE2, the federal government, please help us with that. Two, help us to think about reducing barriers for grantees. For any of you that have ever had to manage a federal grant, you know that it's not always easy. There is a match that's required, starting at 25% and then eventually 1-to-1. Philanthropy helps our nonprofits with match, but for our tribal organizations, our rural organizations, our BIPOC-led organizations, sometimes they need a little bit more help. So you can help them with planning grants, you can help them with preparedness, you can help by finding intermediaries, or just providing the financial support they need. And the third thing I would say, consider us an innovation and a scale partner. As I said, that 250,000 AmeriCorps members and senior volunteers that are working on education, that are working on healthcare, that are doing incredible work in workforce pathways. And so you should see us both as a partner to test and new innovations, but also to think about some scale for the work that you're doing.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I think you've answered a couple people's question. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name right. Ite. And then I know there was another question about how can we have a mutual beneficial collaboration between philanthropy and the agency? And I think you nailed that one, Michael. I'm wondering, this other question that came out from our participants, I think is really important. What can our field be doing to prepare and encourage more people to answer the call of public service, especially when public sentiment towards government is particularly strained, unless young people are seeking it as a desirable career path? So what do you think we can be doing about that? AmeriCorps as well as philanthropy, how might we show up in this moment?
Anyone that's doing any kind of recruitment right now, whether it's for jobs, fellowship programs, or service programs, are facing recruitment challenges. Anytime the unemployment numbers are as low as they are, this agency faces challenges. But coming where we are, the Great Resignation, the pandemic, and the shifts that we've seen in the economy, we're kind of at some historic recruitment challenges. So we've set up a centralized recruitment office, and we could use philanthropy's help at doing a better job of telling the story. We've got to figure out how to engage influencers. The best thing that we have are our alumni, getting Tonya to tell her story, getting Kristen Campbell to tell her story. I was just with some of our FEMA Corps members today who are going on to new pathways to tell their stories about why they did it and why that's helpful. Again, the data is showing that this leads to all sorts of positive benefits. If you're a senior, it leads to positive mental health benefits and networking and connectivity benefits. If you are a young person, it leads to better job pathways. And we see numbers that you're more likely to get a job in the field that you care about. So we could use your help in telling the story and making sure that we're bringing more people into the fold. But I think nothing does it better than showing how it's worked and the pathways that it's created for our AmeriCorps members.
Thank you for that. So we see Shelby Thomas and Stephanie Powers are both VISTA alums. So we got a lot of people on this call that can help share the story. There's one quick question. I know we're going to end in 4 minutes or so, but a quick question someone asked was, have we seen any rule changes in the AmeriCorps program which would allow voter registration? That would allow AmeriCorps members. And there are also questions about changing the stipend and different things like that. Maybe you might want to just talk a little bit about what you can do and what requires legislative action.
We could have a whole session on the two pieces of legislation that give us authority to operate, what we can do and what we can't. Every year we work with our partners on the Hill and the White House to look at some of the challenges. So for instance, we are looking at challenges for DACA recipients being able to serve. We are looking for the challenges of our education award being taxed. Those are sorts of things that require congressional involvement. Things like changing the living allowance, we've been able to do on our own, but there is a tension that exists, right? As we raise the living allowance, that might mean fewer AmeriCorps members, and we're willing to confront that. But if we want to have more AmeriCorps members and a higher living allowance, then it requires more investment from our supporters and champions on the Hill. So it is a balance, and I invite you to email me at ceo@americorps.gov if you have specific questions. And I know that there are members of our team that are in the chat if you have questions about specific pieces of legislation. But we are constantly trying to work to perfect the authorities. The climate when this program was created back in the 1990s, early 1990s, is completely different than it is now. For instance, back then you wouldn't talk about workforce and volunteering in the same breath. And now we understand that that's something that is so interconnected, and it has to be about what we're doing. Back then you wouldn't talk about the idea of both growing the member and also responding to community needs. It might have just been about community needs. Now we know that is more important. So for instance, we've got this 80-20 rule that some of you might know about, where 80% of the time has to be spent in service and only 20% on training. That proposes a challenge for some of our programs like Youth Build that want to put water more into training for AmeriCorps members. So we are constantly looking at those things and constantly looking at creating the change that's needed to make this program run effectively.
Thank you, Michael. Very helpful. And there's still more questions, but obviously we won't be able to get to them. And hopefully we'll have team members, people who have questions, they'll email you or email engagement@cns.gov as a way to get questions answered as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Kathleen to close us out. But before I do so, I just want to give you a big welcome, a big thank you rather, Michael, and welcome home to our community of philanthropists.
It's good to be home. Thank you, Tonya. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
And that is all I'm here to do, is just say, wow, thank you so much, Michael, for being here and for choosing PACE and the council to host you for this moment. I don't know about the rest of you all on this call, but I needed a dose of inspiration today and a dose of hope. And these two people provided it for me. So thank you once again. I also want to thank the teams that backstop the both of you at McKnight and at AmeriCorps for making this event possible. To our partner again at Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement and their CEO, Kristen Campbell. It is always a joy to partner with PACE. And you will be redirected to a survey right after this. So PACE is doing some research that you are participating in. So please go take that quick survey as you exit. Once again, I want to thank all of the council members who are here, all the PACE members who are here, and we appreciate you sharing your experience and this time with us. Take good care.